Hello everyone, and if you've been keeping track of this series, you know that today we're talking about the last in the Jhonen Vasquez comic trilogy known as I Feel Sick. It's really a shame this is the last in this sort of trilogy, because this is the one that feels the most coherent, it answers a lot of our questions, and it really feels like Jhonen has kind of come into his own as an author. Fun fact about this piece is that it's a full color comic, and it was colored by the guy who does the voice acting for Gurr from Invader Zim. That's right, this comic was colored by Gurr. As usual, I will be summarizing the entirety of the story, so everything here is going to be spoilers. If you want to check it out for yourself, like you just learned about it, go check it out, come back, see if you agree with my takes, and you can tell me later. Otherwise, buckle in as we relive the cosmic horror of I Feel Sick. Now, unlike Squee and Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, all of the entries in the comic that start before the comic, they're not comments from the author like the old ones. These are actually relevant to the story. This diary appears to belong to our main character, Devi, and it's her talking about how she got her job as a painter, how she got into this sort of agoraphobic personality she's got going on, and how she doesn't feel right in her head, like something's going wrong. She's afraid to leave the house. She feels like she has to keep working, but she can't work on anything of her own. And that's kind of where we start off the comic. We see Devi aggressively painting at a canvas, and she's swearing a lot, so I can't really show that, so we'll just skip ahead to the next frame here. And she's working on this creepy little doll painting. Her friend, who we also saw in JTHM, shows up, and her name is Tenna, and her job is mostly to try to get Devi out of the house, and she also works as our vehicle, as sort of a look into the past of our main character here. We learn that they live in the same apartment, and Devi lives below what is called the Psychic Fat Lady, who claims that Devi's going to die in a plane crash. So, already off to a great start here. Tenna is here to talk about Devi, and Devi starts going down the ballad of her sad dating life. We get the first experience where, how do I explain this? She's driving home with a guy, and the guy has clearly decided he wants to take things a little bit further with Devi, and she has decided that she's not into it. He continues to try to push her to continue the date, so to say, until they are sidelined by a mongoose in the street, which causes him to swerve and crash into a tree. And, well, homeboy's not looking so good after everything that just happened to him. And he's still begging her, despite being in his current state, to do stuff to him, because it might be his last memory on Earth, because he's not feeling so good. And it turns out he shouldn't even be able to talk, because his brain is out in the street being eaten by a mongoose. I guess it flew out when they hit that tree, which I guess that's how that works. If you hit a tree, your brain's going to fly out. You get a flashback to the future where she's talking to Tenna, and she's going into dramatics about how she feels something's wrong in her head, like something's gone bad, but she can fix it if she just keeps working, or if she does something. There's a way to fix whatever's broken in her head, which, honestly, relatable. Kind of relatable there. And her friend Tenna is just kind of nodding her head, and she's just like, you know what, we need to go out. And she convinces Devi to leave her house to go to a Chinese place where it's just robots that make the food and serve you. And honestly, that's a great idea. If somebody could make that business, please send me an invitation to the opening night. At the restaurant, which is called Eat or Die, which honestly, I love that. They go ahead and get into a little bit of a conversation. Devi talking about how her new job kind of shuts her off from the world, and Tenna asserting that she needs to get out more. But we get this sort of like dialogue where Devi explains her affliction, where she can't work on this painting she was working on before she got her new job as a painter for a local publishing company. And it's kind of like driving her nuts. She's named it sickness, and it's causing her all kinds of problems. Specifically, that it started talking to her, which, if you remember Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, it's not a good sign when inanimate objects start talking to you. Devi tells us the mantra for this painting, and the mantra that it says to her is, "The screws are coming undone, mother." Well, that's ominous. I don't know if I like that. If I had something start talking to me and the first thing it said, or the only thing it said, was "the screws are coming undone," I'm checking myself into the Headmeat Institute. I ain't dealing with that. No, it ain't happening. They eventually return to the apartment where Devi gives some more background on her quote-unquote social life, which has been described by her as horrible, and her social life seems to be just terrible date after terrible date. She went out with, or tried to hit on, a guy who was LARPing as a vampire in a club, but he turned out to be kind of a baby, and then he got lit on fire. That's the important cliff notes of that section. She then went on a date with a zombie, apparently, that ate the waiter's brains, so... yeah, this is pretty horrifying. I don't know if I'd leave the house if that was my social life either. I think I'd stay in. Debbie basically tells Tenna the only way to fix her brain is for her to just focus on work. And Tenna, happily leaves, being an understanding friend, even though she does say that Debbie's overreacting. Then Debbie goes to talk to the talking painting in her house. Probably not a good idea. We learn that the talking painting can complete itself. She doesn't have to complete that painting, which, creepy. And we can see these kind of cracks forming around the painting. That might be important later. We can also see that whatever this thing is interested, because Devi has become aware of it much sooner than most people who it's worked on before. It's some sort of old being, and most people don't really become aware of it until it's too late. And Debbie realizes that there's a way to probably stop it, but in her frustration, she cracks a paint jar and gets her hands all covered in red. And it turns out there was no paint in there. That's actually just her cutting her hands. And this is probably a reference to something that happened to Jhonen Vasquez, who kind of did the same thing to himself, and it kind of halted production on the Squee comics for a while. Debbie really does feel kind of like a self-insert for Jhonen, more so than Johnny did, even though a lot of people say that Johnny is the self-insert. And that's the end of issue 1. There's not a lot of major plot beats other than sickness and Tenna existing and the terrible dates. Beyond that, there's not a lot in issue 1. Issue 2 is where everything kind of ramps up, and it's also the last issue. So why don't we just jump into there, because we're going to get all our answers right there and then. Issue 2 opens with a similar diary where she goes through how she's still having trouble with the paintings, and she's worried about sickness, and she's got a meeting with this man known as Mr. Nevers, who owns Nerve Publishing, which is a company that she does the paintings for the covers for. She also mentions having a dream about the devil who is jealous at God for his ability to create stuff. And the devil explains that he creates things by infecting the minds of people that a soul is wasted on. And that sort of gives birth to something that mostly resembles a human, but it's not, and it tends to mess everything up for the rest of the world. Which is an interesting concept, an interesting callback to Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, but we'll see where that goes, because this could just be a dream. After the diary entries, we jump into the main comic, where Debbie's having a conversation with Sickness still. And it turns out Sickness isn't quite fully formed. It's only recently moved into her brain, which means it can't really control itself because it's still part of Debbie, more or less. So when Debbie asks it questions about how to stop it or its experiences, she's actually able to get information out of it, which is a very interesting turn of events. We're learning more about this Sickness. And despite the progress she's making, the only real thing that she learns is that this creature, whatever it is, wants her to stop thinking while it continues to paint itself. It wants her to go watch movies. It wants her to distract herself with something else, some sort of fixation or obsession. It also laments that she woke up so soon, which we don't really know what wake up means in reference to this creature, but I'm going to assume it means becoming aware of what's happening. Before Devi can make any real headway, though, she has to go and talk to Mr. Nevers at Nerve Publishing because they want to talk about some of her paintings, and she's got to submit some paintings for edits and stuff, so that's where we're going right now. Forget about the cosmic horror living inside of a canvas in your house. No, go ahead and just go to your job. Do exactly what the cosmic horror told you to do. Always a good idea to listen to the cosmic horror living in your painting. We get to Nerve Publishing and we get to the meeting, and Mr. Nevers, he's got all these suggestions about adding monkeys to all of the cover arts because kids love monkeys, and Devi isn't really into that, but she remembers something that Sickness told her, that her friend never woke up. He didn't wake up in time to deal with his own problem. And if you remember from Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, he had his own weird creature sealed behind something that he was painting. So we get a flashback to that night. We get this statement from Johnny, and it says, you think that if you stop doing something that defined you as a person, that maybe you cease to be that person. And Debbie responds sarcastically, but they have a real conversation about it. Johnny used to be an artist just like Debbie, but he hasn't drawn in forever except his Happy Noodle Boy stick figure comics, which bring him no joy. He doesn't understand how to create anymore, and this goes back to another thing that Sickness said to Debbie earlier, that it needed her creativity to form itself because it has none of its own. Now, if you don't remember from Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, Debbie was one of the only people Johnny tried to put an end to who was able to escape. And that's going to become an interesting point of topic soon. But we flash back to the current day where Mr. Nevers is going blah, 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 and she quits her job. She's tired of working there, and we can see that Sickness has started to emerge from the painting. Whatever just happened, Sickness does not like. It seems like this job she got is supposed to distract her. It's supposed to keep her from using her creativity. She's supposed to just listen to this guy and paint what he tells her to, and she will not do it. As she leaves the building, we see that Sickness has cracked out of the painting and is now mobile, which probably not a good thing. She gets to her apartment, and suddenly it seems like things have gone weird. As she's running through the hallway to get to her apartment, she feels the extreme need to paint, to use her creativity. She's stopped. She almost trips over this dog. She gets accosted by her friend who she's running from. This cat attacks her, and she kind of gets rid of the cat, but its blood is acid, which that's not normal. That's not how cats work. I don't think that's how they work. Is that how cats work? Tenna is still chasing her, and this child jumps out of nowhere asking Debbie to be her mommy. And in the weirdest turn of events, Debbie catches the child and apologizes not to the child, but to Tenna, who she chucks the child at. She's almost home, but there's one final obstacle. The psychic fat lady from upstairs has become lodged in the hallway. She is a mass of meat. She is a living wall. So what does Debbie do? How does she overcome this obstacle? Well, she decides to just dive on into the area between the fat and the woman and just start crawling through. I don't know why I'm laughing so much, but it's so ludicrous. I can't help it. So as she's swimming through the fat of this woman, she learns that the woman isn't psychic, but her fat is, and the fat shares that gift with the fat lady. It tells Debbie that the last person who could possibly understand her in this world was a boy named Spidgey that she met when she was younger. The boy had approached her with a Valentine's Day card. He had a little bit of a crush on her, asks her what she's eating, and turns out she's eating chalk, and when she speaks, it spews out a bunch of chalk dust. And Debbie asks, where is that boy now? Maybe I can meet him and he can help me fix this. And it turns out he died from a chalk-induced asthma attack. My God, that's so dark. The Fat tells her that this means that the only thing that was left of her was her work. And when that creativity was taken over by sickness, it's basically hollowing out everything that's left of her, leaving her with nothing. No social life, no passion, just a life of servitude to this company, this sort of brainless thing that she doesn't really enjoy doing, but it pays her bills and lets her keep being an agoraphobe. She thanks the Fat as she breaks from the folds of the woman and out the other side and gets to her apartment, where she could see that Sickness is now moving around on these weird Invader Zim looking legs. Sickness tells her to stop fighting, to just kind of lay back, or otherwise Sickness is going to end her life. Just let Sickness do what Sickness needs to do, which is apparently keep harvesting her creativity to build itself up. But Devi is quick to pick up on the fact that the creature has no sway over her. The creature is part of her, and it's afraid because it's incomplete. She can actually do something to it. In a last desperate attempt to help itself, it tells Devi that if she just relaxes and lets Sickness complete itself, she can walk through the world like a god. She can walk through life without any fear. She could take no damage. She could even get away with murder if she wanted to, which starts to explain what the heck was happening in Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. He was, in fact, being protected by some sort of entity, and Sickness is very similar to the Doughboys in this perspective. If we remember back to Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, we remember that Devi is one of the only potential victims that was able to escape from him, but not only was she able to escape from him, she was able to harm him, which is not something that seems to be possible. So we know that Sickness either attached itself to her around the time that she met Johnny or just before, because the creature isn't strong enough. It's not strong like the Doughboys, but it is strong enough to protect her even from someone with protection like the kind that Johnny has. Well, it turns out Sickness made a big old mistake, because Devi does take up the opportunity to start killing if she wants by throwing Sickness against the canvas from which it spawned and impaling it with a paintbrush, then removing its eyes and saying that it couldn't have picked a worse person to hole up in because she can't share her life with anyone, just as the psychic Fat had told her, and that her compulsive life is controlled by her work, and now Sickness will forever be part of that messed up cycle. It will be her tortured little audience. And the comic finishes with Devi and Tenna up on a hill just as a plane crashes into their apartment complex. Turns out Devi wasn't the one who dies in a plane crash. It's the Fat psychic lady, and the Fat just never had the cojones to tell her that. Now, I will be doing one final video where I go through all three stories and kind of explain how they all connect. But I do want to discuss the one single through line that is interesting. Everybody in these comics who is plagued by some sort of demon is an artist. If you remember the story The Call of Cthulhu, sensitives or artists, dreamers, creators, those are the people who were having the nightmares about the rising of Cthulhu. They were the ones making the carvings to Cthulhu. And I think that's what Jhonen is touching on here that makes this such good cosmic horror. He's not just messing with the idea that cosmic horror exists and it makes people crazy. He's also picking at Lovecraft's idea that it specifically affects the creative types. We can also see this kind of through line in The King in Yellow, which predates any of Lovecraft's works, but it's a similar kind of concept. So what do I think of I Feel Sick in relation to the other two? I honestly think it's the strongest piece in Vasquez's repertoire here. I think it's probably the one that stands out. It's the one that needed to be made. It explains so much of what the world we're seeing is made up of. But at the same time, It also illustrates one thing that Jhonen feels deeply, and it's that society is stupid. Even in Invader Zim, his most popular work, Dib is often disregarded because people around him just don't see what he sees, which raises some interesting questions about Dib as a character, and I might have to dive into that later. Here's what we do know, though. If you live in this world and you are not stupid and you are creative, you are susceptible to acquiring this sort of cosmic hitchhiker. It infects you, and then it tries to make your brain go soft by distracting you. And we see a lot of that in Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, where he gets distracted by simple, excessive pleasures like movies, commercials he likes, cherry freezies. He's just completely into excess. But Devi is different. Devi is isolated. Devi doesn't want to hurt anyone. Devi just wants to create. And feeling the end of that creation turning in her head makes her aware of the creature and allows her to overcome it. Whatever that creature serves will not become the same as what was going on in Johnny's house. Now, I would love to see a follow-up to this where maybe Devi can help Johnny sort out his issues. But overall, I am very happy with the conclusion of this trilogy made up of Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, Squee, and I Feel Sick. Honestly, I think it tells a perfect story, and I think it's one of the most underrated, poorly drawn comic series I've ever seen, because it does tell a coherent Lovecraftian narrative that is so good, it's almost painful. It only suffers in the last issue from the overuse of the F word, which feels very Has-Been Hotel, which isn't surprising because this is kind of the inspiration for Has-Been Hotel, so big shocker there. You're going to see me put up probably about 2 more videos related to this. One of them is going to be about an hour-long compilation of the 3 videos covering his 3 comics prior to Invader Zim. And then you will see one more video, which is me covering all 3 of them in tandem and connecting all the dots to try to form a cohesive narrative out of what is honestly a great story. But it's sort of obfuscated, and it doesn't really come together until the sequels, and specifically this final piece. So there is sort of a timeline I want to build, a video I want to go explaining how it all connects to each other. So be on the lookout for those. If you're a fan of the channel and there's a story or a comic or something in horror media you want to see me cover, please go ahead and comment that down below. If you could like the video, if you could share it, that'd be greatly appreciated as well. But past that, I think this is where we're going to call it. Thanks for listening. God bless, and I'll see you in the next one.